Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Happy that you're with us again. Big show for you today. We're going to look back at the Preakness, and we'll be talking with the trainer of the Preakness winner, War of Will. That, of course, Mark Casse. And later on, we'll talk with Rob Hyland, who is the producer for NBC. I mean, he is the producer. You name a big, high-profile event, and Rob is the guy on the scene, including the Triple Crown races. So we'll talk about the preparation to get ready for those shows and what happens when things happen like the Kentucky Derby this year and like the Preakness this year, events that you're not usually used to happening when everything is said and done. Thomas Kenny is here, of course, as always. Hello, Thomas.
How are we doing today?
Good. Scott Hall is here with us, as always. Hello, Scott.
Hey, Kenny, how are you?
Good, thanks. Good to be back, and enjoyed my stay in Baltimore, as I always do.
Did you get those crab cakes?
Got the crab cakes. Got to go get the crab cakes. Did
Nice.
that. Went by my favorite Italian place up there, Aldo's in Little Italy, and had the post-Derby, post-Preakness, I'm still Derby mode, post-Preakness dinner that I've had for years. And so it was all nice. It was nice. A couple of things about this Preakness. Two things happened in there that was wonderful for horse racing. One is War of Will won. Not picking a side here, but the fact that given he was impeded in the Derby, his trainer believed in him and brought him back, didn't stay on the sideline, that he came in there and won. So a horse that's been in two legs of the Triple Crown won the second jewel, the Preakness. I thought that was very important. Also, it'll probably squelch a lot of this talk about almost the essential match race. Should he be matched up against Maximum Security? Maybe down the road they'll meet. But the point is, he went out there, he did his thing, he won. They didn't gloat about it. They didn't say, see, Maximum Security people, what we did. They just won the race. But that's what you'd expect from a class act like Mark Casse, and we'll hear more about that in a minute. The second thing that happened in there that shows just what athletes these jockeys are. Bodie Express, just out of the gate, throws jockey John Velasquez into the air. John lands and tumbles, and the average person would have had broken legs, broken everything, but not him. He's bruised up a little bit, maybe shaken just a little bit, but I interviewed him afterward. No excuses. Horse got a bad start and threw him. Later on, a couple of days later, in an interview, John said that there was just miscommunication between the assistant starter and he. The horse is ready. His horse obviously wasn't that ready, and Bodie Express runs all over the place. About horse racing. Now, we do this show in Kentucky. This is where I'm from, and we do it at a studio here, Screen Eye Productions. But even in the state of Kentucky, people think that everybody in the state knows all about horse racing. You could probably go through the phone book of Kentucky right now and call anyone, and they'll have a conversation with you about basketball, especially about Kentucky basketball, and would probably have a lot to say, certainly would have an opinion. With horse racing, which surprises some people, I think it surprises some people that are in the horse business in the bluegrass state, that not everybody follows their sport. I've had at least a half a dozen people that are all sports fans and friends of mine call me up after that race and want to know what would have happened if Bodie Express had finished first. Would he have been the winner of the Preakness? And, of course, we know it doesn't work that way. Once the jockey's unseated, the race is over for that horse. Oh, they'll keep running because they're pack animals. They're used to running. I mean, Bodie Express was enjoying himself. Even when they gallop out after the race is over and they turn around and come back, he turned around and came back with them, and he's still full of gallop. He's running. They're trying to track him down because that's what they do as pack animals. But when a jockey is unseated, the race is over. The horse did not finish, regardless of where they actually finished ahead of the rider horses. They don't get any credit for that. But it was interesting that people didn't know about that live in a state that you would think everybody's supposed to know about horse racing. Yeah, Thomas, did you know that? Yeah, you probably did. Yeah. You're smart. You knew that.
I don't want to give myself too much credit, but I've heard that before.
Well, definitely. Give yourself a lot of credit. You're a sharp guy.
Thank you, Kenny.
Scott, you knew that, didn't you?
I did, yes.
See, but we're around the sport.
Right.
We all know it a little bit. And so, but Bodie Express was getting all these tweets and this YouTube video and things. I mean, in some ways, he stole a little bit of the thunder of the day.
Said, hey, look at me. I don't have a jockey.
I don't have a jockey. You know, there are going to be some cynical bettors out there say, see, they don't even need jockeys. I told you those guys don't even need jockeys.
Oh, no.
At least those that bet on the horses that lose, right?
That's right.
It really does highlight how much of an athlete John Velasquez is to take a fall like that
yeah.
and come away relatively unscathed.
Oh, tremendous athlete. I would say pound for pound, and you can argue pound for pound in all kinds of sports, but pound for pound, it's hard to top the jockeys.
Yeah.
You know, these guys weighing about 115 pounds, guiding 1,100-pound horses at 30 miles an hour, and, you know, they're swapping horse flesh at times, as we saw in the Derby. They're that close to a catastrophe every time. And as my friend Gary Stevens has pointed out several times, it's the only profession he can think of where the ambulance follows them around the track. Follows them. Now, there's ambulances at football games, of course, a contact sport, but they're not driving up and down the field on every play. But you watch a race, I've had friends ask me that. What's that ambulance doing back there? Because in an instant, something can happen. That's right. Sometimes it's tragic, and sometimes it's very bad. And thank God in this case, it was okay. John Velasquez got up under his own power. They brought him back in an ambulance, precautionary, looked him over a little bit, and then I do the interview on NBC with him. And he was all good.
Was he reluctant to give that interview?
Well, you know, it was he didn't want to, I think, point fingers. All I could ask him was what happened. Because when you see it for the first time, and I just saw it as it happened, and you don't go back and you don't have a chance to break it down and all, and I think the obvious question in that is, what happened? You were there. I wasn't on the horse, nor do I ever want to be on a horse, but you were there, so tell me what happened. And he gave a good interview, as he always does. He's a very eloquent guy. But no, he didn't really want to talk about it at first. And I think some of it was a little humble. He didn't want to talk about himself because he knew I think he knew. Another obvious question, are you okay? Do you need to go? Do you need to see a doctor? And he said, no, he didn't. So he was okay, and he's still okay, and he's still out there riding. And like you said, Thomas, and Scott knows, and all of us listening, I'd say everybody listening to this show at least has an appreciation for what athletes those jockeys are.
You bet.
And, you know, you start talking pound for pound, they're incredibly strong. You know, I guess if you did break down the ratio, I'm not a kinesiologist, but if you start breaking down the ratio to like a linebacker to a jockey, the power base, the core is, I would guess, similar.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you ever ridden a horse, even like on a trail ride, which is all I've ever done?
Mm.
I mean, you know, you got to have a little bit of effort. You got to let them know you're in charge, or they'll want a little trot on you or something. I can't imagine breaking out of a gate and, you know, they're going to fire out of there and you got to hold on, or else.
Right.
As we saw, or else.
True. You know, it looked like Improbable was getting a little skittish there before it went off.
He did. He did. I asked Bob Baffert about that, and he said afterwards that Improbable has trouble at the start of races. He just gets antsy. He gets a little ornery, anxious, whatever you want to use there. There was no problem other than he was just anxious again and really didn't, he gets into the race. He doesn't start the race well. He gets into it. And at this stage, you got to kind of get into it a little better than he did.
Right.
And he didn't. So that's it. Now, Bob told me after the race he didn't plan on going to the Belmont. Now it looks like he might take Game Winner. And, you know, things change. Things can change so quickly. Mark Casse was real quick to say that he was going on with War of Will, which is great for horse racing.
Yes.
At least we're going to have one winner of a Triple Crown race in the Belmont. So that'll be huge. Country House isn't going to run. I don't know when he'll run again. And it looks like Maximum Security is going to stay at Monmouth Park. I don't know when he's going to run again. Probably, maybe not until the Haskell in July. Maybe. At least it's shaping up that way. So the star of the day is War of Will. Got attention in the Derby, won the Preakness. His trainer's coming up in just a few moments. Winning that Preakness, though, he didn't win the Derby. You're just the Preakness winner. Just the Preakness winner going on to win the Belmont Stakes. It's not an automatic.
No.
Is it, Chief Researcher Thomas Kenny?
That's right. It's only happened 4 times in the last 20 years.
And they would be?
Obviously, Justify in 2018, and American Pharaoh in 2015. Triple Crown winners.
Right.
And a prerequisite of a Triple Crown winner is that you win the Preakness and the Belmont.
It kind of works that way, doesn't it?
That's right.
I've noticed that Triple Crown includes 3. Or as one coach who I will not mention asked Bob Baffert last year, if Justify doesn't win the Belmont, will he try him again next year? It's an innocent question.
Sure.
And that's when Baffert explained to him, who is a coach who knows all about one and dones, that with 3-year-olds it is one and done. It's a 3-year-old season. It's a 3-year-old race. But again, it shows it's not universal. It's a niche sport. Everybody doesn't follow horse racing or know about horse racing. That's why we did the horse racing show.
Exactly. Make it fun and interesting.
Yeah, we try to. Okay, so 4 times it's happened in 20 years. Let's see, the other 2 are Fleet Alex in 05.
Yep. And Point Given in 2001.
Point Given in 2001, who had a lot of trouble in the Derby. Bob Baffert probably would look back on that of all of his horses and say that's the one that coulda, shoulda won the Triple Crown, because he was by far the best horse that year. But he had a lousy Derby. I think he finished like 5th, somewhere in that neighborhood, but then came back and showed how good he was in the next 2 races. Okay, so that's what's ahead for Mark Casse, is trying to come back and win that.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure,
Kenny.
sure.
Would you say that in horse racing, a horse is only as good as his last finish?
Most of the time, yes. Most of the time, yes, as far as the general public's concerned. The people in the know about it, they'll give that there could be problems. I don't think the horse racing community, few of the bettors, because he went off at pretty good odds, but most of the horse racing, they realize a couple of things here. Mark Casse is a terrific trainer. Should be in the American Hall of Fame, is in the Canadian Hall of Fame. Why he didn't get in the American Hall of Fame this year, I don't know. I voted for him, not out of friendship or anything else, just on his record. 5 Breeders' Cups, 4 Eclipse winning horses. Anyway, but if you see a horse that is legit that did have some problems, like he did, I don't think it's that situation. But that's a good question. I'll ask Mark. As of right now, his last race is really good.
That's right.
The last race of, say, Improbable, not so much. Plus, he hasn't won this year. So, what's going to happen with Improbable? Same with Game Winner, last year's 2-year-old champ. I mean, these are legitimate questions. Same with Country House. When is he going to come back? And if he does and doesn't run well, there'll be some questions. With Maximum Security, there'll be some questions. I understand the Wests. I appreciate them. I know them. Not well, but I do know them. And, they probably have some questions they want to answer themselves. Is my horse going to be that good the next time out? If he's not, then it does get on that race-by-race situation. If he doesn't have any trouble and he wins the race, then you could look back and say, see, he was really the best in Kentucky. He's still the best out there. That's a good question, though. We'll try to answer and ask more than answer, because we got stars that'll be answering this. Mark Casse and Rob Hyland coming up. Stay with us. You're watching and listening to The Horse Racing Show.
Episode 18.
Wow. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. We're glad that you're with us. We're having our first repeat performer. Our first repeat guest is coming on right now. The last time we talked with him was the week of March 23rd before the Louisiana Derby. And now here he is as the winning trainer of Preakness champ War of Will, Mark Casse. Mark, thanks for coming back on, and congratulations.
I'll come on as many times you want, Kenny.
Well,
especially if we're talking about wins.
Yeah, we might. Hey, we got you. We got you slated for the Belmont too. Just thought I'd let you know. No pressure.
I'm ready.
You know what I loved about it all, and I said this at the start of the show. I thought, and not choosing sides here. We're friends. I'm friends with several trainers. Not choosing sides, but it was great, I thought, for racing that War of Will won, squelching a lot of controversy, in my opinion, and the fact that he came out of the Derby and went on to the Preakness, kind of that old school style, trying them all. And then you said pretty much right after the race, all things look good, we're going to the Belmont. And to me, that's really important for horse racing, in my opinion.
Well, thanks. It's interesting. I've got now somewhere about, I'd say, 500 texts and emails, and pretty well, I would say, 75% of them say the same thing about how it was good for horse racing. And so that's important to me. You've known me for a long time, and I love I love horse racing. It's been my life. And any time that I can contribute or help in any little way to the better of our sport, then that makes me a happy guy.
Well, we talked to you before the Louisiana Derby. Of course, most people know the gait problems down there, pulled muscle, war will, a little hiccup there in the training to get ready. We know about the Derby and being impeded in the Derby. So I guess the third time during this cycle was the charm for you. No problems, and you win a race.
Exactly. It was rewarding, gratifying in so many ways. Maybe one, as I've said, I was just glad for War of Will to get to strut his stuff, and then two, a lot was said about Tyler, and I didn't think the criticism was warranted. And spectacular ride by Tyler, young man, great rider, and he never panicked at any point in time.
I thought Tyler Gaffley, I really don't, I think a lot of people admired that you stood up. I mean, you stand up for family, right? That's what you do.
Well, exactly. They're my kids. War of Will is my kid, and so is Tyler could be my son. I have kids that are older than Tyler, and you mess with my kid, you can mess with me, but don't mess with my kids.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, that's universal, Mark. And that's just life, isn't it? That's what you want. Don't screw with family.
No, don't mess with them.
And, along those lines, I'm only saying this because it's not like inside knowledge here. It's been publicized. You've mentioned it before. But Gary West, the owner of Maximum Security, did send you an email, a congratulatory email, not long after the race. And with all said before and all that leading up to, that seems like a nice sportsmanship, reaching out gesture coming together. Maybe. I hope so.
Yeah, I thought it was great. And after, I've been thinking a lot about Gary recently. And I mean, to feel the pain, here's a guy that has contributed so much to horse racing, and it's been a big part of his life. And to win the ultimate goal, and then to have it snatched away, and it has to be so painful. Nobody can know the pain that he felt or is feeling. So I understand his frustration, and I have to say, even though and he did aggravate me and upset me in some of his comments, I said to my wife the other day, I said, next year, of course, if we can win the Kentucky Derby, that would be wonderful. But if we can't, I would love to see Gary West win the Kentucky Derby. He deserves it, and it's just unfortunate circumstances that what happened this year.
Well, that's a class thing, and you've handled the whole situation, I thought, impeccably. And I mean that, that. I wouldn't tell you if I didn't. I just wouldn't say anything. But, you handled it because it did get a little dicey. And there's a lot of people that said about you as well, you deserve that Preakness win. They're happy that you got one of the jewels of the Triple Crown, a long, successful career. And I thought a classic empire as War of Will's coming down the stretch. I don't know if that entered your mind at all, but that was what was going through mine.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it entered my mind. I was not going to celebrate any victory until we got to the wire. If you watched, I recently watched the telecast with my wife, and you can see me going back and forth. And what I was doing was, where our vantage point, it was extremely tough to see how far we were in front and how much farther it was to the wire. So I would look to the left and see him running. Then I'd look to the right, and I was looking at the screen, the big TV in the infield, trying to figure out, and my head was going back and forth. I wasn't celebrating victory until he went across the wire. We'd had that happen to us. And on another note, even at about the 5/16 pole, 3/8 pole, when we were full of run and looking for a place to go, I was like, oh, please, not again. Just please give me somewhere to go. That's all.
And by the way, I didn't mean to bring that up as a sore subject. I love Classic Empire. I think I picked him all the way through. I love that horse.
he was extremely talented, and what happened that day, if anybody knows Classic Empire, he had a mind of his own, and he liked company. And if Always Dreaming could have went for another 100 yards and carried him, then he wins the Preakness.
Yeah.
It's just once Classic Empire made the lead, his mind would wander, and that's what got him beat.
You know, my mind does that. I just wander. Somebody has to put me, has to get up beside me.
I'm with you. I hear about these new, where kids and these new studies, and they lose focus. That was me. The only thing I ever focused on probably from, I want to say, second grade through high school was the racing form. I could focus on that really well.
You were telling me a great story about that. I guess a kid reading the racing form with your dad, Norm, who's a legendary, well-respected horseman, and it was kind of like it was like a class session for you each day to read the racing form, wasn't it?
It was. So what would happen is, my dad, we had a farm, and it was kind of centrally located. So the lady that delivered the racing form would bring about 25 racing forms, and she would put them in our office, in the front of the office, and people would drive there to pick their racing forms up. So I would sit and watch from the window, waiting for her to bring the racing form, and then I would run over and read it. And Sunday was always, a tough day for me because there was no racing form on Sunday. Interesting, later in life, I worked for a guy named Harry Mangurian. I was the general manager of his farm, and he would bring up horses, and I would tell him this and tell him that, and he goes, "How do you know those things?" He said, "What were you, 12?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I was 12." So, I tell everybody I was foaled, not born. And when kids were watching cartoons or reading the comic books, I was always reading the racing form, and my friends through and through high school and everything would wonder what they were going to do with their life. I never doubted for 1 second what I was going to do with my life.
And what a good run it has been and still is. 10 times outstanding trainer in Canada and the Canadian Racing Hall of Fame. We joked about that the last time. How many people think you're Canadian?
Exactly. I hear it all the time. And, I'm extremely, extremely proud of what we've done at Woodbine in Toronto. And they have been just wonderful to me. But yeah, I'm a good old U.S. boy born in Indiana. It's funny, I forget what Derby it was. So NBC came to me and said, "We're going to interview you as we walk over and talk about what it means to you to be born in, here in Louisville." And I said, "Okay, but there's one little problem."
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, what's that?" I said, "I wasn't born in Louisville, but if you want me to go with it, I will."
That was a stat that came up. I did a story on it this year. I mean, it's been done before, but doesn't it kind of amaze you that there's not been in 145 years now, no Louisville-born trainer that's ever won the Kentucky Derby?
It is, it is amazing because, obviously Lexington and Louisville, they're so, everybody loves horse racing. Yeah. And I mean, you go around Louisville, everybody knows about Churchill Downs and racing. So, yeah, it is. Hopefully that changes when Norman wins the Kentucky Derby.
Your son Norman this is his second year out on his own coming into it.
And he's a Kentucky bred Louisville.
Yeah.
Fold. Yeah. So maybe Norman will be the first one. If not, I hope Dale is.
Yeah, Dale Roman. Yeah. With like World Approval and Shamrock Rose and Tepin, and we talked about Classic Empire, these Eclipse of winners that you've had and the 5 Breeders' Cups and all that. Now that you've won one of the classics here, the Preakness, has life been different in the last few days in the Casse household for you and your family?
Oh, I would say yes. I've kind of been just isolated myself a little bit. Got back out, and I really love looking at our young horses. So I watched a bunch of them train today, and I've done lots and lots of interviews and but it's amazing. I'm an Ocala boy, and the community has really embraced this
Oh, sure.
this victory for us, and it happened even before we won the Preakness. It's this entire Derby deal and everything it's made more people aware of our sport and horse racing, and wanting to understand it. A couple times we've went to dinner or breakfast, and people somehow know that we had something to do with the Derby and whatever. And we get so many questions. It's just it amazes me.
Well, and they'll be talking about that. Like I said on the show a couple of weeks ago after the Derby, the 150,000 there, I guarantee at least 75,000 went out of there confused. They still probably didn't understand, maybe confused. More than that.
My wife and I went, and maybe I told you the story, but we went to Winter Park, Florida. So it's near Orlando. Went for my wife's for Mother's Day. We were looking for a present, and we go into a store, and they asked where I got my shoes. And my wife said, Louisville, Kentucky. And they said, there were 4 men there, and they younger men too. And they said, did you go to the Derby? And we said, well, kind of,
Yeah.
And then they were like, what did you think about the disqualification, this and that? I mean, they were just going on, and I was just kind of smiling, In the end, my wife said, that was our horse. That was so, and they were just so excited. And so those kind of things, even with our Triple Crown winners, I don't know. People didn't pay as much attention. Controversy brings attention, right?
You know what, Mark? Sadly or not, it does. It does bring attention to any sport, and horse racing's got it. And I was laughing at, thank God everything was good with John Velasquez and all, but this Bodie Express, all the internet play he got for just running around. I've had people ask me, what if he'd finished first? Would he have won the race? And these are people that live in Kentucky. I think they should know horse racing a little more, but, they don't follow. They're basketball guys. And they, so that was another thing that got some attention.
Talking about amazing. I think John Velasquez may be the toughest human being I've ever been around.
Yeah.
I mean, John and I are good friends, and this summer he didn't say anything, but I promise you, because he never got an X-ray, he rode for 6 weeks probably with a broken foot. And he would go. He couldn't hardly walk, but he'd be riding and winning, and never changed his ability. But he is just an amazing guy. If that were me that came off, I'd still be laying there.
Me too.
I told him, I texted him that night, and I said, "You guys don't get paid enough," and he said, "I agree."
Isn't that the truth?
We're not giving him a raise, though, so don't.
He'll listen back. I'm going to try to have Johnny on pretty soon. He'll listen back to this, Mark, and say, Mark Casse, just after the Preakness, said we don't get paid enough.
Exactly.
Every jockey's going to be to go. Tyler, young enough as he is, maybe he won't be, maybe he'll be able to be okay, but unless they try to talk to him about this.
Yes, exactly. But Johnny, just a first class guy.
Yeah.
We always we have a little joke because my wife's always blowing him kisses and he's blowing her kisses. And even in the Preakness, as he went by, he's blowing her kisses. I said, Johnny, come on, I'm here. But we all, his wife and my wife, we all, we enjoy each other's company. So.
And now you go on to the Belmont. Was this pretty much after the race? Almost immediately after you saw everything was good with War of Will, Mark, that you said, we're going to the Belmont. If he stays like this, there's no doubt.
Again, Kenny, I've been doing this since I was a little boy. Before the Breeders' Cups, before the Pegasus, everything. The Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont, to me, are everything. And as long as I feel comfortable with the condition of my horse and he's happy, of course I'm going to be at the Belmont. I've said this, and I think there's too many trainers out there that worry too much about that. They think they have to win all the time and do that. You do this. That's not me. I'm confident enough, and I understand that I'm going to get beat But I always go back and revert back to what Alan Jerkins told me when I was like 20 years old. He said, I don't understand horse trainers. They all want to rest them when they're winning, rest them when they're not doing good. And I will, I'm going to, as long as I'm happy with him, he's running well, I'm going to run him. And at that time when he doesn't run well and looks like he needs a rest, then I'll give him a rest. But until then, you'll see us running.
And that's what makes you so good, man. It really is. And, we were talking earlier in the opening here of this show about, are you as good as your last race? Do you ever think that your horse is only as good as his last race? And, of course, in this race, it was great for War of Will. But I just wonder if a great trainer like Mark Casse looks at it on a race-by-race basis, or looks at it with certainly the two great excuses you had. Sadly, having to have two great excuses in Louisiana Derby and the Kentucky Derby.
I never look back. I just feel so fortunate to be where I am today. In life, we've all have different paths, and, there's some things that haven't went my way, and there's been lots of things that haven't went my way, but I'm extremely happy where I am today, and I wouldn't want to change a thing. And again, to sit here and for that split moment in the Kentucky Derby when it could have been absolute disaster. If you told me then, oh, your horse is going to be okay and you're going to win the Preakness, it just is amazing to me. And that's why I never really got upset after it. I was just so thankful to have him. And I see that. I said this earlier. I see the win picture. Not the win picture, the picture of when the collision or when the incident happened. And right behind him there is Jose Ortiz.
Yeah.
And I can see his face, and he knows what's going on in front of him. He has no control over it. And but I just 2 weeks prior had spent time with his wife and his two young kids, and they could have easily been fatherless. So we just have so much to be thankful for.
Yeah, we talked about that among the broadcast group. We've talked about that, just how thankful we all are from the standpoint of the human and horse factor in their lives. But just and thank goodness it didn't. And what a catastrophe that would have been for racing, given the year that racing's already had with all of Santa Anita. That would have just been actually, you know what? There might have not have been a Preakness on TV had something like that happened. Seriously.
No, and believe me, that went through my mind. So, as I've said, I walked around Sunday morning, the day after, thinking, "What a lucky guy I am," and then, as I said before, we were like, "Okay, that's over. Let's forget about that. What can we do to win the next one?" Mm-hmm. And that's the way my mind works. So we're always trying to look at the bright side. And one thing I like about Tyler too, going back to Tyler and Johnny, they're such positive guys.
Yeah.
I've called for the last couple of years. I've called Tyler the next Johnny Velasquez. I've been saying that for some time now.
High praise. Yeah.
I truly believe it.
The question is going to be asked of Mark Casse and everybody else, but especially, can he get the 1.5 miles? And I always wonder, how does anybody know if he can get the 1.5 miles? You have an idea, you can look at the breeding and all, but, we've seen horses that weren't even supposed to get 1 mile that suddenly they outran their breeding and they got 1.5 miles.
I can tell you this, anybody that says that they can get 1.5 miles are confident, they don't have a clue. I think it was Dr. Chandler said about 2 months ago, the truest statement I've ever seen. I've seen too much to know anything. And all I can say to you, can he get 1.5 miles? We're going to find out, at the Belmont. The key to any horse getting the 1.5 miles is the ability to settle. And believe it or not, and you would know this as a handicapper, but a lot of people don't realize, but speed is very important going a mile and a half.
Yeah.
It's not so many times we see if speed wasn't important, I'm going to win the Belmont, and it's not going to be with War of Will. It will be with Sir Winston.
Exactly.
I have a horse called Sir Winston who ran second a couple weeks ago in the Peter Pan.
Yep.
Going a mile and an eighth. He went the last quarter of a mile in 23 and 2,
Yeah.
which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then he galloped out. But the way a mile and a half runs, I'm sure Sir Winston will get a mile and a half. I'm not concerned about that. He will get the mile and a half because he shuts off and doesn't go until you ask him to go.
Right.
The key for War of Will to go a mile and a half is the ability to get him to relax. And so that will be the key.
And they always talk about that clock in the head for the jockeys as important as ever. And, it's always a test for the jockeys, as we know, because they don't ride that much on the dirt at a mile and a half.
Yeah.
Very few races will they have all year. And maybe like the Brooklyn, I'm trying to think how many races they'll even have this year on the dirt at a mile and a half.
Yeah, very few. So that's part of it. But if our horse settles, and I think he will, they have to beat us. He has a tremendous amount of ability. And if you watch, even in the Preakness, interesting enough, and I didn't realize it until I analyzed it a little closer, the pace was extremely fast, which I knew it was. Mm-hmm. And we were fairly close to it. But if you look at the second and third place finishers, they didn't just come from back. They came from like last and next to last.
Yeah,
and
they were
way back.
Really close.
So that tells you that, the pace really called it quits, except for War of Will. And then the other interesting deal is as soon as they got past the wire at 1, I don't think Tyler hit him. He hand rode him for maybe the last 75 yards. Mm-hmm. I could be wrong on that, but I think I'm right. But more importantly, as soon as those horses came to him right past the wire, he took off again. And if you saw, the outrider had to pull him up.
Yeah.
So those are the things you look for. They're not an absolute, but they're sure good signs.
Well, all the best with you, and all the signs were pointing to the class that Mark Casse is, that he would have a great shot in the Preakness, and he came through with War of Will, and a lot of us are happy for you. Well-deserved and a great job, and we look forward to seeing you at the Belmont, Mark.
Well, I appreciate it, Kenny, and hopefully we can talk again. Anytime.
You know that.
Right.
One day we'll get you in our beautiful studio here just outside of Lexington. You'll love it.
That would, I love Lexington, so that sounds good to me.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark Casse.
Have a great afternoon.
You do the same, pal. We'll be back with more of the Horse Racing Show right after this. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. Thank you for watching us on YouTube, listening to us on iPlay, Google Play, all those things. We're glad that you're with us. Really happy to have this guy with us. He's been a friend. He is my boss. If there's a high-profile sporting event on NBC, there's a great chance that Rob Hyland's going to be involved. A multiple Emmy Award winner. He covers the track and field events at the Olympics, figure skating at the Olympics, the high-profile ones of all the Olympic sports, those two, I think. And, of course, the producer of the Triple Crown, and he joins me now. Hello, Rob.
Hello, Kenny. Great to be on.
Yeah, thank you, man. And I just want to ask you about the Triple Crown this year. You're as well prepared as anybody in the history of TV, I believe, getting us all ready to do these events. But what's happened at the Derby and then what happened again at the Preakness with the runaway horse and John Velasquez, in addition to War of Will coming back and winning, it's certainly been a different kind of Triple Crown for us, hasn't it?
It sure has, Kenny. We begin meeting each spring in late February to go through the plan for the upcoming Triple Crown, and you kind of plan for a scenario, and you never expect to go through the first two of these things and experience what we've experienced so far. So I was just at a Belmont earlier today, and I was meeting with the folks out there, and we're just hoping for a clean, safe race, incident-free and drama-free.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, though, isn't it? It seems like the drama and controversy has drawn some viewers that may not have stayed around to watch a lot of the racing. People like this controversy.
It's amazing, Kenny. The rating minute by minute of the Kentucky Derby this year actually went up after the race ended. So I think that's a testament to what you're saying. People, by word of mouth, by social media, wanted to tune in after the fact to just watch the drama unfold, and it was pretty incredible.
Well, Rob, we had Mark Casse on. He was laughing because he has a great friendship with John Velasquez, but he was laughing that now that, thank God, Velasquez is okay, that he stole a little bit of his thunder because all the tweets and all the social media stuff about Bodie Express running free got a lot of attention, as well as War of Will winning the Preakness.
It's amazing. I was talking to Mike Tirico last night at the Sports Emmy Awards, and John Velasquez was on CNN yesterday morning, and I'm pretty sure John was not on CNN the morning after he won the Kentucky Derby either time, and it's just amazing the traction that incident got. And I know, talking to friends that night on my way back to New York City, more people were watching Bodie Express during the Preakness than the race up front, and I'm glad the horse was, safely returned to the barn and everyone got home safely. But it was a crazy situation.
As far as when you go in, we're talking with Rob Hyland, who is the multiple Emmy Award winner for NBC Sports, and he's my boss, so I better do this good, huh? No pressure on me, right?
Come on, Kenny. We're teammates. There's no boss here.
Anyway, Rob also does Sunday Night Football. He's worked on that. He does Notre Dame football. I mentioned in the Olympics, track and field, and figure skating, and I bring all this together. When you prepare for these sports, is there anything that's similar, a thread that runs between them to get ready for horse racing coverage, which does not happen on a regular basis? It's a limited run on any of the networks, and especially when you just have three big events like the Triple Crown.
Kenny, they're all very different. I think the only thing, that all of us at NBC work on sort of share as a common thread is preparation. Mm-hmm. You prepare for every event the same way, although horse racing, as I'm looking at the Derby on a 5-foot by 7-foot whiteboard in my office, it's a massive, massive challenge because every 45 minutes or so you have a live sporting event with animals. Anything can happen in those races, and then you go back to, a feature segment, a cooking segment, a handicapping segment, and then all of a sudden there's a race, and there's nothing like it. The Football Night in America, the show I work on each Sunday in the fall, is a very formatted show and a very structured show. There are very few things that can take you out of your format other than Mike McCarthy getting fired at 7:01 as we come on the air.
Right.
In a horse race, in a horse racing telecast, there's just so many variables that come into play that make it so unique and distinct from any other sport I'm a part of.
And the expanse of Churchill Downs, when people have asked me that haven't been there, and that's what I love, one of the things with the NBC broadcast is to show the football fields that could fit inside Churchill Downs. And I like the way that you have us all the announcers line up and basically guide them from the barn area to the paddock to the starting gate. That's a lot of ground to cover. That's a lot of camera action going on out there, Rob.
Well, yeah, Kenny, our director, Juresikov, has more than 50 cameras in place at the Kentucky Derby. And, it's unlike a football game. The other sport that Drew covers, Sunday Night Football, that's a 100-yard football field, and it's not moving, it's not changing. Where the action's going to be. Churchill Downs, I think it's 153 acres, and every inch of it is somehow showcased, from the barn area where I usually put you with a favorite to Millionaire's Row to the red carpet where the celebs walk, to the paddock, to the jocks room. We've got every inch covered, and it requires a massive technical effort.
And as far as going on now into the Belmont, that's another big place. It's a little more intimate. I always like the Derby to some, gala event, some great dinner party, almost like a black tie. And then you've got the barbecue backyard atmosphere of the Preakness because of the intimacy, the way Pimlico. But then you go back to a place where I believe you could put the grandstand on its end, and it's taller than the Empire State Building.
I was there today, Kenny. It is big. Big Sandy is big. And, the difference, though, when you get to Belmont from a television perspective is that you don't have to worry about all of the, I'm going to call them visual distractions in the infield like you would at Pimlico or at Churchill Downs. The infield is relatively pristine, although there is a new cell phone tower in the middle of Belmont, which is new this year. And so the obstructions for camera angles are not sort of brought into play at the Belmont, but it is massive. It can make 55 or 60,000 people look like an empty venue, which is sad to say.
Yeah, it really is. That's how big it is. And you think about it in its heyday, racing. People are always asking, Rob, after the Triple Crown, did racing take off again? I'm not sure that racing needs to take off. I think it's settled in. It's got an audience that's going to be consistent. People like to go gamble, and then it's going to have the audience that comes in every year as they do for the Triple Crown races, particularly the Derby. I don't think that they should always compare it. Will it become like the NFL? It's never going to be like the NFL or even NASCAR and things. But from my standpoint as a Kentuckian and cover the sport a lot, maybe it's not a bad thing just to have good racing and excitement and some controversy every now and then and keep it interesting.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think the Triple Crown audience specifically is an event-driven audience, much like the Super Bowl is, or the World Series or the Olympic Games. People tune in to watch the spectacle of the Kentucky Derby, the party of the Preakness, and the challenge of the Belmont and the mile-and-a-half test. Would I love to do a better job of having new eyeballs, younger eyeballs tune in? Because what I really want to get across some point, Kenny, and I'm working really hard with our partners, specifically with the Breeders' Cup and the Breeders' Cup Challenge, we really want to just let people know if you have a day to get out to a racetrack, there are not many better days you can have. If you bring a group of friends out, it's a great experience. And I really want to do a better job of getting that message across and hopefully bringing some new viewers. We're going to always have the people tune in once a year for those big events. But, I'd love to carry that momentum to the summer series in the fall because we do have great racing, and a day at a racetrack is a heck of a lot of fun.
Talking with Rob Hyland, who's extraordinary producer for NBC Sports. We've worked together for, 20 years, Rob. That's about it's flown by, so I guess that's good. We haven't had an ill word, at least, and the show's not over right now, but so far so good.
Kenny, you are the best. And you have everything from bull riding to horse racing and everything in between. So
that used to be my joke. I did bull riding, boxing, MMA, and horse racing, all the animal sports. I've covered them all. But getting back to like the Derby, what I've always really respected about you and liked about you, and I thought of my late mother Edith when you mentioned your mother Ann about explaining things, because you're getting an audience that does not watch horse racing. And for some of these people, they're watching the Kentucky Derby. If it's an exciting Derby, and maybe with the controversy this year, it continues on and they'll watch Preakness, maybe even on the Belmont. But the whole point of that is, you need to introduce the people to what's going on with these people that bring the horses to the track, be it the jockey, the owner, the breeder, whatever. And I really like the emphasis you put on that, because in my opinion, down the road, for horse racing to grow, if it can grow in increments at all, it's got to be more than just about betting to start with. You got to have some compassion and sympathy and empathy and all that involved.
It's interesting. I had this conversation with Tim Layden, Sports Illustrated's Tim Layden, who contributes on some of our bigger events like the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crown. And in my opinion, I know he agrees, and he'll say it much more eloquently than I will. There are no better characters than in the sport of horse racing. And every horse in the Kentucky Derby has a trainer that has a story, a jockey that has a story, an ownership group that has a story, and a barn full of the people that make that horse each day get to the track and, get home safely. And, there are just so many layers to each equine athlete that, to me, that should always be the number one focus on the bigger races we cover, the broader and the more casual audience. Let's tell great stories, and as long as we get the racing right and deal with the wagering, that will be part of the show. But to me, the stories of horse racing are what really captivate a broad audience. And I know, from time to time, I jump on, the Blood Horse message boards and the DRF message boards. And, there are a lot of people that hate our coverage because it's dumbed down to some degree. And we know that the people that are reading Blood Horse and DRF, they're going to watch the Derby no matter what. So we're trying to find new fans and new people that will really fall in love with a sport or a story and find a reason for them to stick around longer if they know that Mark Casse and his son Norm have a horse together in the Derby and that they've got a really unique relationship and that Mark grew up in a house right across the street from Churchill Downs.
Right.
I'd much rather spend 4 or 5 minutes telling that story than 4 or 5 minutes on speed figures.
And Rob, something I've found out too, I've got a cousin that does this. He's a pretty good handicapper, by the way. He's online all the time, or he's at OTB. Yep. And he'll say, yeah, I heard about the car. I said, what do you mean you heard about it? You don't even watch? And there's a lot of these guys that are reading the Blood Horse and the Daily Racing Form. They're at OTB and they hear something about, NBC's coverage. They didn't get in. They didn't say he ran in 58-2. They didn't explain anything correctly. And I like every now and then a gal come up to me and say something like that. I said, did you watch? How much did you watch of the show? Well, I was at it off track out at Keeneland, or I was at off track, out in Remington Park, and no. So that's what I always love about some of these horse. I say, if all these fans were horse racing fans, horse racing would be on 45 times a year because you'd have an audience of like 5, 6, 8 million anytime it's on.
Yep, you're right.
See, there's my statement.
Listen, I don't discount the fact that it is a sport that deserves, incredible respect and analysis, and we try to do that as well. But we try to kind of take a multiple slice approach. We give you a slice of everything. Jerry and Randy will sort of digest the X's and O's for you. You will tell the best stories of the day and deal with some interviews. Mike Tirico will set the stage for what is the race what we're actually covering and why it matters. Edzo will handicap the race. Donna will give us every incredible report on horseback and the post-race interviews. Lafitte Pinkai will be in the jocks room, covering all the stories that take place there. And then, Nick Luck is the newest member of our Triple Crown team. He's got a little bit of everything to do, but we try to give you something as a viewer for everyone. That's sort of the goal of these shows, these bigger shows.
Is a little bit like it from your standpoint, talking with Rob Hyland, NBC Sports, because you do, in my opinion, the two highest profile Olympic events, track and field in the summer, and then figure skating for the Winter Olympics. And the stories you have to tell there, because those are two sports that people don't follow on a weekly basis, probably, like they're keeping up with NFL teams even in the middle of the summer.
100% right. They are the two biggest Olympic venues. I'd put swimming and gymnastics up there in the summer games, but definitely figure skating is sort of the flagship of our Winter Olympics coverage. And you're getting a 1 rating if that, for your average figure skating show in the fall leading up to the Olympics, and you get to the Olympics, you're doing a double-digit rating with more than 20 million people watching. So you got to tell the audience what they need to know. But you mentioned my mom earlier. I told Tara Lipinski and Johnny Wheeler, you need to know about Ann Hyland. Ann Hyland doesn't know what a triple Lutz is or a sow cow, and I need you to make sure you broadcast and not narrowcast. You guys cover figure skating all year long, but you need to make sure you invite and engage a brand new audience. And it's the same with Otto Bolden at track and field. He's also a coach and coaches a lot of athletes. We'll do a 1 rating for the Prefontaine Classic, which is a track meet that takes place in the early summer, and you get the Olympics and the same sort of numbers as figure skating. And again, I encourage Otto to really not speak down to, but to always put a comma on an expression, a phrase, a term, and then define what that term was and why it matters. So very similar to horse racing. When Donna Brothers is talking about a sealed track, what does that mean? When a interview subject throws out a fraction time for the quarter mile and half mile, have the reporter, like Nick Luck did at the Derby, explain whether that's too fast or slow, just to make sure the audience understands the sport. And it also makes them feel a little bit more invested if they understand and are not being spoken over.
And Rob has been a part the telecasts of 2 Triple Crown champs, a controversial losing Triple Crown with Steve Coburn, with California Chrome, what happened this year at the Derby. I mean, my friend, this has been a pretty interesting 5 years of horse racing coverage. Not to say the others haven't been, but it's really interesting.
It's been a crazy stretch. Let's not forget. Let's go back to my first Triple Crown, experience with All Have Another scratching the day before the Belmont.
Yeah,
we had to rip up the entire format and start from scratch after we got off the air on Friday night for a show on Saturday. So. Yeah, every year horse racing, which I love, I truly love it. It's brought me the greatest joys in my life. My 2 little girls are sort of a product of covering a horse race. But every year there just seems to be something that, will test, your chops as a producer, and you better be ready to react and turn in any direction.
Well, you do that so well. And, and I think that all of us that are on your announcing crew, we know that you have confidence in us. So believe me, that helps a whole lot when you're out there running around and, we're not going to get in your ear to say, hey, Rob, we'd like to be on FaceTime. We'd like to, could you give me one more hit so I can wave to the family? We're not going to do that. And, that helps a whole lot too. I mean, it's a great communication.
I feel so lucky to be a part of this team. We had a nice dinner in Baltimore last week with most of the on-air reporters and announcers, and it is such a great group of people. And everyone on that team, it makes the show better. And I'm the one that feels lucky. I get to sort of guide you guys, but I'm really taking your lead a lot of the time, and you guys are what make the show so successful.
If I send you a story idea, I think you should go with it for the Belmont. Okay.
You got it.
Here's what it is, because I would love to interview Ann Hyland one time.
I think that's a good idea. I'll have to get Ann to the Belmont.
I mean, honestly, you use your mom, and I understand that because, my folks, I didn't grow up in this racing world. I mean, when I started doing local TV in Kentucky, that's how I got into it years ago. But for many of my friends are football, basketball, baseball guys, boxing, that's their world. And so I kind of think about them sometimes when I'm telling a story, and I always think about what you say with your mom. Let's explain it a little bit, because we could throw out all kinds of fractions and go back to speed figures, and to them it's a foreign language.
Correct.
So what now?
Broadcast, Kenny, not narrowcast.
That's right. So, okay. So are you surprised it's really been a good flow. Honestly, after the Derby, I wasn't sure how things were going to shape up for the Preakness with setting up the coverage. And I think that War of Wills going on to the Belmont is a great storyline to continue, among other things.
It's a great storyline. And he's a deserving champ. If he can do it again at the Belmont, I think, the 3-year-old horse of the year will definitely be something that everyone's watching throughout the summer and fall. And listen, the Preakness, I was impressed by even the numbers that we did. We had more viewers watching the Preakness without a Derby winner or a Derby runner-up. In fact, what is it? The top 4 finishers won in the Derby.
51. I think
it did a higher rating than the PGA Championship. So it was the highest sporting event, afternoon sporting event of the weekend, and sort of the power of these big events that we have in the spring between the Derby, Preakness, and Belmont. I'm so looking forward to seeing what War of Will can do again, and I'm also looking forward to seeing Master Fencer, the horse from Japan, come back. He ran an incredible Derby. If you go back and watch his race, I think he finished 7th or something around there. He came flying at the end, and I'd love to see that horse again. And I can tell you without a doubt, we'll have every storyline covered with you leading the way each lap around when we do those whips.
Well, thank you, and I'm looking forward to. I thought of Master Fencer. I thought of Lonnie. Remember, Lonnie was kind of he was kind of the wacky horse for some reasons. Yep. For the family audience, it's enough said. But for the Derby,
he was a little frisky.
He was a little frisky, exactly. He could have been Randy was his nickname, and so from the Derby and the Preakness, but then he ran a heck of a Belmont.
He sure did.
He stayed all the way. So I think the Japanese horses down the road. They seem to be better than the European horses at this stage along the Triple Crown road from Master. Maybe that could be a case.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we're going to have a great Met Mile earlier in the day. We're really excited about our summer series as well. I just met with our partners at Naira, and we're going to be televising a turf Triple Crown this summer, and it starts fall starts weekend in July, and there's a race up at Saratoga and another one back in the fall at Belmont when we get back to Belmont. So, a lot of great racing coming up on NBC and NBCSN that I'm really excited to be a part of.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for being on this show, Rob.
Thanks for having me, Kenny. I do listen to it every week, so I'm looking forward to listening to the first half of this before I jump in.
I tell you, everybody was telling me how pressure it is. They said, "You're going to interview Rob?" I said, "Yes." I go, "Don't feel any pressure." It's good to have friends like Eddie Olczyk, isn't it? And people like that telling me how much pressure I have. I said, "Well, I had you guys on. I didn't feel any pressure." They said, "Yeah, but we're not in charge." I said, "That's a good point."
Like I said, you're a great teammate.
Rob, thanks for being on. Multiple Emmy Award winner. He's probably won 2 or 3 Emmys in the last 20 minutes we've done this show. And I look forward to seeing you in Belmont, my friend. Man. Thanks, Rob. Rob Hyland, NBC Sports, here on the Horse Racing Show. We'll be back with more right after this. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. We get ready to wrap it up, and I thought we had great guests again this week. Mark Casse, the trainer of War of Will, Rob Hyland from NBC Sports. I really liked what Rob said, and he'll listen back to this, and he is my boss, even though he says we're teammates. But, we do try to tell the stories because, I say this probably too much, some people think, but horse racing will only grow when people get to know the people like a Mark Casse or like a Belmont, the guys that aren't necessarily high profile, but good horsemen, well respected. And I ask you, as still a young man, but when you were growing up, I know your dad's into car racing, therefore you got into it, but you kind of heard him tell the stories, or you got stories on the drivers that made you either root for them or against them, I'm guessing.
Right. I heard a lot about Dale Earnhardt when I was growing up. Of course, Richard Petty's regarded as, one of the greatest of all time, greatest to ever get behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah.
He's up there with, the Michael Jordans of the world.
Right. And, that's what it is. Scott, do you remember, when you first, a sport that you followed as a kid? And I'm guessing it's because, your dad was into it, or you probably, you just heard about these guys and you wanted to know more about them.
Yeah. Oh, it was the Oakland Raiders for me. It was Lyle Alzado and Howie Long. That my dad loved that era of football, and so that's what really sparked my interest.
I grew up a St. Louis Cardinals fan. My grandfather's a St. Louis Cardinals fan. Therefore, my father was. Therefore, I was. So I remember hearing him tell. We heard Mark Casse earlier talk about hearing stories, being able to talk about horse races that happened when he was a little boy or even before he was born because he read a lot. Right. I was the same way. I've heard about the Gas House Gang and Stan Musial and these people that I never saw, but, from my dad. And then I remember as a kid seeing Bob Gibson and Lou Brock and all these guys. And then, get their baseball cards. You'd read their stats. You'd learn a little bit about a hometown. I remember reading about Bob Gibson played for both the Harlem Globetrotters. That's how good an athlete. He played for the Harlem Globetrotters and, of course, became a Hall of Fame pitcher. I don't know why that just came to the top of my head, but I remember that. And that's the whole point. I think someday with racing, while you have these wonderful horses, these beautiful animals out there running, again, with the breeding business the way it is, they're not staying around. If they have a spectacular season, this is one and done, and you won't know about them. But you might remember a John Velasquez. What an athlete. Maybe you should Google him, and we're going to try to have him on the next couple of weeks. Guys like that, what athletes they are.
That's right.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, John's amazing.
of course, growing up, I didn't know so much more about, the people side of horse racing. For me, it was more the horses.
Yeah.
I remember there was a lot of buzz about Barbaro back in 2006.
Right.
And then in 2008, Big Brown was another one that people were, looking for that next Triple Crown winner.
Yeah.
Didn't end up happening for a few more years after that.
I didn't think I was ever going to cover a Triple Crown. And I can go back, let's see, Silver Charm, Real Quiet, Charismatic, Bang, 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 1, 2, 3. Didn't happen. Then back-to-back years with Funny Side and Smarty Jones, and didn't happen. And then you mentioned Big Brown, didn't happen. California Chrome, didn't happen. But the personalities and the people, and Rob touched on that earlier, and we've talked about that so many times, is the characters out there. There's some really interesting people in this sport. And we've seen a lot of that now, so I understand. And didn't Mark Casse handle that with such class as he has throughout this whole thing? He hopes Gary West could win it next year if he doesn't. Even though Gary West said some things, and probably not intending to say things about Mark Casse or Tyler Gaffleone.
I don't think that was ever the intention.
No, he's just upset that he had the Derby and he didn't have the Derby. And, I can understand that. I think I know the man well enough to say that. I understand, they took the roses away from his wife, the garland of roses, because they had to put it on the winner. And, that had to be an awkward moment. I don't know, maybe Churchill could or should send her 20 dozen roses and boxes of candy and apologize for any embarrassment. Public relations, that's what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah, you feel like they could have done something at least.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think, and maybe they have done some things in between, and we'll try to find out more about that. But yeah, just something. And hopefully with War of Will winning, it kind of squelches all this, you think we should have match races and who finishes ahead. The who finishes ahead of each other, who cares? If you don't win the race, you have 8 horses in the race, I finish 7th, you finish 8th, that makes me a big winner of $5 million? Huh? Huh? What kind of race is that? Well, we'll talk more about what kind of race is coming up with the Belmont and many more things again next week. Mark Casse, Rob Hyland, thank you all so much. Thomas Kenny and Ben Chafin's still on vacation, and Scott Hall, as always, thank you guys, and especially thank you for being with us. I'm Kenny Rice, and we'll talk next week at episode 19 of the Horse Racing Show. Wow.